Hi all, Ray Ford here, Euclid Public Library, back to recommend more young adult novels to my young adult readers, or even my adult readers if you want to dabble a little bit. Now, today's video was inspired by a discussion that I watched between two of my favorite contemporary authors. They are Jason Reynolds. We already know that that's one of my favorite authors. And then there's Nick Stone. Now, they were having a discussion on Instagram because they were talking about her new book, Shuri, that was just released. I think this was around May 5th. And if you're interested, please, you can go back. The video is still there. The discussion is still there on Instagram. Please go watch it. It's delightful. You'll love it. So as they're discussing, her process of writing, in Wakanda, they talk about how much of a departure it was for her to write in this fantasy realm, because in fantasy world, everything is made up. Now, luckily, Wakanda was already created, but she had a chance to build onto and out of Wakanda, which was kind of difficult for her. So it's interesting to hear her talk about her process of writing in a fantasy world. But then they sort of brought the conversation back to how they write, what they write, and why they choose to write about what they write about. And that's where I began to get inspired for this video, because I'm watching these two people discuss, this sort of their writing process and their logic for why they write. And I'm like, wow, if I could put together a Mount Rushmore of contemporary writers, these two people would definitely be on it. So the light bulb came on. And I say, next time I do a book recommendation video, I'm going to talk about my Mount Rushmore of contemporary young adult writers. So here we go. Before I begin, our Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, she said something that I read, or she said something that I read, a quote that really just hit home for me. And she said that books should be windows on the world, but they should also be mirrors. And as I read that, I'm thinking about Nick Stone. I'm thinking about Jason Reynolds. And I'm also thinking about Angie Thomas and Tiffany Jackson. So these are my four Mount Rushmore writers. And why? Because they do just what Miss Carla Hayden said. They write stories that are windows. They let us look out into the world through these. They frame the world and they have us look out into it. But as they write and as we read their work, it makes us reflect on ourselves, which is huge and which is key. So that, to me, these four writers do it. Again, Tiffany Jackson, Nick Stone, Jason Reynolds, and Angie Thomas. So let's start with Tiffany Jackson. Now, Tiffany Jackson wrote a book called Let Me Hear a Rhyme. And the reason why I chose this one out of the few books that she has published is because this one speaks directly to me. It starts in 1998 and it's about rap music. So you had me at go. So there's the book begins with the main character who actually is dead. His name is Steph and he's just been murdered. And so after his funeral, his two best friends, Kadir and Jarrell, they end up in his bedroom, where they end up meeting up with his sister who was already there. Her name is Jasmine. And when they get in the room, Tiffany Jackson, what she does is she sort of paints the picture of his world, in his room, and he has all of these posters and pictures of these iconic and prominent rap artists, up to 1998 in his room. People like the Notorious B.I.G., Tupac Shakur, and Nas. So we get to understand that, this kid, Steph, he was really into rap music, but we also get to understand that he was a huge hip hop culture enthusiast as well. Not only that, Kadir and Jarrell, what they find out is that not only was Steph a huge hip hop culture fan and enthusiast, he was a rapper and an artist himself. And so they began to listen to these demo tapes that he made before he passed away. And they were like, man, this dude is a genius. People need to hear his work. So they get this bright idea to begin to promote his work. Apparently he was a lyrical genius. So they began to promote his work as if he's still alive, which, on the face of it and at the beginning was pretty cool. But then he catches fire. Steph's music is that good that he begins to catch fire. And so they have to kind of keep this facade going. But there's another part of the story that is kind of like two stories happening or running parallel at the same time, simultaneously. So in order for them to get that music of Steph's from Jasmine, who was in the room with him, she says, look, I'll let you take, this music of my brothers, and I'll let you do whatever you want to do with it. But you have to help me find out who killed my brother. So that's a completely different story. But it sort of links up to what Kadir and Jarrell are doing. So, and they take on that challenge, which is tough because now you have to start asking some tough questions. You have to start making some people uncomfortable. And it might not turn out so well for Kadir and Jarrell. But to figure out what happens, you got to read the rest of the novel. And like I said, I always leave out a bunch of details when I do these summaries, but that's just to draw you in. So please go pick up Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany Jackson. She's on my Mount Rushmore of contemporary writers in young adult fiction. Nick Stone, Dear Martin. And I fell in love with Dear Martin just because, to be honest with you, the title drew me in. I couldn't figure out why would somebody name a novel Dear Martin, because it sounds like somebody's writing a letter. And guess what? Somebody is the main character, who is Justice. Now, Justice, the book begins with him being brutalized by the police. He's at a party and his ex-girlfriend is having some trouble getting home, and he tries to help her. But while he's doing that, they're in this suburban neighborhood, and somebody called the police. We don't know who, but somebody calls the police. They show up. They don't listen to him. They don't hear what he has to say. They just immediately believe that he's not supposed to be there, and they brutalize him. They throw him up against the car. They hit his head up against the car. They arrest him. He has a bad night. So as he's processing this, he has this journal that he keeps. And in this journal, he writes to Martin Luther King Jr. So the book sort of takes this turn. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Martin Luther King and the rest of the other civil rights activists fought and died, for me to have, these rights as a human being. But as he's experiencing life today, he's not seeing the results of what they fought for, because in his mind, especially after he experiences a lot of this brutality situation, he starts to question, like, wait, what did they fight for if this is still happening? So he writes in this journal to Martin Luther King, almost asking him for advice. And not only that, Justice is an extremely intelligent young man. He's 17, he's getting ready to graduate high school, and he goes to a prep school, and it's not racially diverse at all. He may be the one or two students in the school who are black. And so, like Patina in Jason Reynolds' book, she lives in these two different worlds. Justice lives the same way. He lives in these two different worlds. And when he goes to school, he's always combated and confronted with, these racially charged comments and, biased and bigoted jokes, that he's now, after being brutalized by the police, he's starting to say, well, wait a minute. I don't particularly care for, that type of humor. And I don't care for those, racially charged, undertones that you're always saying. I don't care for that. And then he has another hurdle that he has to cross, because his mother has instilled in him not to date young white women. He's a young black man. She's just trying to instill in him, don't date young white women, because of the complications that may happen as a result in the world. She recognizes how the world is, the reason why he's writing in this journal, but Justice is like, what's the big deal? Justice is on the debate team, and he's really good at it too. And his debate partner, his name is Sarah Jane. and she just happens to be the apple of his eye. I mean, he really, he's really falling for her. They're falling for each other, but they're living in these two different worlds, and they are being fed, these ideas about interracial dating and the reasons why it should not happen. So he's confronted with that in the book as well. And yes, he ends up writing to Martin Luther King about these, interracial instances that he's running into, because he's confused. He's 17, so he's trying to figure it out. So that book is awesome. The next writer is my man, Jason Reynolds. And my favorite book that he's written so far is All American Boys. This one is tough because, and it's written, and it was written with Brendan Keeley as well. So it's co-authored. And the book, this one is a tough read, but it's a great read. And it really sort of taps into the social justice movement in writing. And it's for young adult fiction. And it's probably the epitome in my imagination, in my opinion, for young adult literature, at least today. So we meet Rashad, and Rashad is in ROTC, and he is on the basketball team, and he's just an all-around good kid. His dad is a former police officer, and so he goes to school one day, and he's getting ready for a dance, and so he leaves school, he goes to the store. I mean, and I'm leaving out a lot that happens in the middle, but he leaves the school, he gets to this corner store, and the store clerk believes that he's trying to steal stuff out of the store. And Rashad is trying to tell him, look, man, no, I wasn't trying to steal anything. It just looks kind of weird because of the way some chips sort of rolled down the aisleway. And I'm like, look, it was an accident. He's trying to tell him it's an accident, but nobody will listen to him. There's even a witness in the store that tells him, no, it's not what you think. So then the clerk calls for the authorities, and there's a police officer standing outside. He comes in, he pulls Rashad out into out of the store and into the public eye, and he just beats him. He really does a lot of damage and wails on him. But across the street, there's a young man. His name is Quinn, young white man, and he sees the whole thing unfold. From start to finish, when they got outside the store, he saw the whole thing unfold. The ironic part about this is that Quinn just happens to be really good friends with the officer that's doing the brutalizing to Rashad. And so now the story really begins, because Quinn goes to his side of the railroad track, so to speak. Rashad goes to the hospital, and then there's the school in the middle. So Quinn goes back, and he's being fed, you don't say anything, you stay loyal. The police officer, he was just doing his job, and that's all you say, that's all you know. Quinn, meanwhile, is recovering in the hospital. Then there's what's happening at the school. Word starts to get around about what happened, and it starts to divide the school, because there's justice on one side, and then there's the police officer's role on the other side. And so there's this division that happens in school. And it really goes to show, and what Quinn and Rashad and the young people in school find out, is that racism and bias and prejudice didn't just end when the civil rights movement concluded. And that's a big theme, and a huge theme in the book is like, wait, what do we do now? This is not supposed to happen. We're not supposed to be so divided. So what Jason Reynolds and Brendan Keeley do is they really merge these two worlds and get to see, okay, right is right, wrong is wrong. What are you going to do when it comes down to it? And it really throws the ball into young people's court, because that's where change can happen, in your thinking. That generation is like, okay, what are you going to do with this? We've had the civil rights movement. We have these social justice movements. What are you going to do with this particular instance? Great book. So then we get to Angie Thomas. And There's only one book right now. I mean, she's written another great book called On the Come Up. She's written as another book that she has coming out. But you can't overlook The Hate You Give. And The Hate You Give is, again, it's another story. The main character, her name is Star, and she witnesses the killing of her friend at the hands of police officers. And as a police officer's bullet. And so what she experiences is, okay, what do I do? Same thing as Jay, the same question that's posed to Justice and Dear Martin. How do I handle it? The same question and that's kind of posed to Quinn and even Rashad in All American Boys. How do I handle this? What do I do? You know, how do I become me in all of this? So Star, again, she lives in she lives in two different worlds. She goes to school at sort of a prep high school. She has to deal with the racial undertones and the racially charged language, and all of this stuff. And then she goes home and it's a different world. So to have 2 feet in both worlds is pretty difficult, I would imagine. I didn't really go to school that way. So I can only imagine how difficult, living in those, in almost like 2 lives, living that way has to be. But Star is straight hip hop. I mean, her shoe collection is crazy. So you can only, see she's kind of being herself in this world at school, but at the same time, she's blossoming on the inside and she's starting to become her own version of an activist, and she starts to lead protests. And she starts to speak out and she starts to become this voice that was inside of her. It starts to come out, about this crime that was committed that she wants to stop. She doesn't want anyone else to have to live through that. And she has her influence again. She has influences tugging at her on both sides at home. She has influences tugging at her at school, but all in all, she finds her own voice. And I think that's what sort of combines or connects all of these books, these sort of social justice movement type titles, and which I love. I think they're great. So my Mount Rushmore of authors: Jason Reynolds, Tiffany Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, and then if I had to, I would like to add another face to it, actually 2 more. Elizabeth Azevedo, and I'll leave it at that for right now. So we'll have 5, and I can speak about Elizabeth Azevedo in another post or video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please go check out Let Me Hear a Rhyme, Dear Martin if you haven't read it yet, All American Boys if you haven't read it yet, and especially The Hate You Give if you haven't read it yet. So make up your own Mount Rushmore and let us know who it is. And we'll be happy to see it and respond and reply to it and have a discussion about it. So we'll see you soon.